My name is Dr. Alphonso Evans Sr., and I'm excited to talk about taking the risk, meet your father. We are excited to bring you panel discussions. We have some awesome panelists that we are extremely excited about, and we want you to stay tuned and remember to look for the upcoming book, Taking the Risk, Meet Your Father.
Impressive.
Good evening to everyone out there. We're excited to see you this particular evening. We want to thank you for joining us this evening as we talk about taking the risk, meet your father. It's an opportunity for us to engage and connect and affirm, transcend, and to heal as we experience and talk about the relationships between fathers and sons. This particular evening, we have a phenomenal lineup with us today and our panelists. And we're going to ask each of them to give a short bio of themselves before we get into this great discussion. This particular opportunity that we have in the month of March, we will talk about the importance of fatherhood. In April, we will talk about the fatherless son. In May, we will talk about the roles that women play within the dynamics of the father and son relationship. And finally, in June, we will have our great kickoff of Taking the Risk, Meet Your Father, where we will talk about all of the stories and the short stories rather that are inside of the book, and all of the contributors will be there to share their journey. So at this particular time, we ask that Bishop Evans, if he would just introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. So glad to be a part of this conversation tonight. I truly believe the conversations change seasons, and I'm looking forward to hearing from some of the greatest minds that I know. And I welcome everyone to this discussion. We're going to have a great time, and I'm glad you took out the time to respond to the invitation and join us. So I'll let you go. And Odell.
Hey, Bishop, it is good to see you. Good to see everybody. Thank you for having me, Bishop Evans, Dr. Evans. I am Odell Dickerson Jr. I serve as the president of Odell Exec Enterprises, as well as the chief operating officer of the New Psalmist Baptist Church in Baltimore, Maryland. So I am glad to be with you today. And since we're talking about fatherhood, I had 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl.
Great. All right, Bishop Reed. Okay, we're going to go to Bishop Sharona.
Greetings, everyone. It's a delight to be on tonight with all these esteemed colleagues. I am Mark Sharona. I pastor in Orlando, Florida, Church on the Living Edge. And every once in a while, I show up on Daystar.
Excellent. All right. All right, Bishop Reed. Can you hear us, Bishop?
Hi, yeah, I do hear you. It's breaking up a little bit, but I hear you. I hope can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes, we're nodding. Yes.
Yes, I'm Keith W. Senior. I'm senior pastor of Sharon Baptist. I'm the senior pastor of Sharon Baptist Church. Been here for 39 years. I am also a father. I have 2 boys and 2 girls. And just became a new pop. I'm a grandfather as of December the 1st to a beautiful granddaughter by the name of Noah. And this is another phase in my experience that I'm looking forward to.
Great. Excellent. We're going to dive right in because we don't have a lot of time with you this evening. So we're going to go right to our first question. We're going to ask all of our panelists to answer this first question, and then we will, go back and forth and really dig into these topics. So our first question for this evening is, when you hear the words protector, provider, disciplinarian, and model, they're usually the words that are given or descriptions that are given to what a father should be. Is that your description of what you think a father is? And if so, explain. Whoever wants to take it first. Mr. Dickerson?
I'll jump in.
All right.
So I think those are a portion of what a father should be. Mm-hmm. All of those things are absolutely should be included, but a father is so many things. A father is a disciplinarian, but a father is also a gentle being and being able to catch your children when they fall, to allow them room to make some mistakes so that they have a cushion. Everybody's not fortunate enough to have that. It is such a privilege to be a father because, you know, you just never knew when you're a father, you tend to think back on when you were a child, what your father was like. Right. And I think if I could be half the man my dad was, I would do an amazing job. I'd give up right now. But I remember him being that protector for me. I remember I felt at my safest with my dad. And I think mostly of my youngest son, who's 15, who has social anxiety. And we didn't get that detected until he was about 13. But people are always forcing himself. You know, in church, older people always force themselves on children. Speak, hey, young man, look at me, talk to me. And he had social anxiety and we didn't know it. So I had to step in and say, just let him be. He's a quiet child, right? So I always wanted to be that protector. And I always wanted him to feel like he was at his safest when he's with me. And I do have a daughter. I'm a girl dad as well. And so, Dad, you know how we are with our daughters. And she's 19, about to go to Clark, Atlanta. So
all right,
I am gonna set up some cameras all over Atlanta. I've let all my brothers, Jamal Brown, all my brothers know that she's on her way. They will be looking out for her. Yes.
So you got the crew ready.
The crew is ready.
Exactly.
Yes.
Bishop Sharona, can you give us a little insight on that?
Yeah, let me take a theological jump here. Jesus comes up out of the waters of baptism, and his father says, "You are my uniquely loved son, in whom I am well pleased." There are within our lives those who are the fathers that affirm us, and sadly, there are fathers who deny us. In the opera Faust, Faust decides to make a compact with the devil, to sell his soul to the devil to get what he wants. And in the middle of his bedroom one night, in comes the devil, who comes in the form of a character named Mephistopheles. And Faust asks him, "Who are you?" And he says, "I am the spirit who denies." So the denial of anything that is tied to who we could be and who we could become is the anti-father spirit. Jesus, Father, affirms him for who he is and takes pleasure in him. He doesn't say, "You're my beloved son. I'm glad I'm proud that you're going to work miracles." It has nothing to do with what he does. He affirms him at the core of his essence for who he is. And there's something about fatherhood that I believe is essential when it comes to affirming our children for who they are, apart from what they do, that gives them the strength to be able to come out of those waters of life and face the temptations that, if you are who you say you are, if you are the son of God, if he is your daddy, turn these stones into bread. And so there's something about not having to prove ourselves when we have a father who approves of us.
I get the word just keeps coming up, affirm.
Yeah.
Just that word, so powerful.
Because affirm means to give strength. Infirm means to take it away. So the spirit that denies takes away our strength. The spirit that affirms gives us our strength. And I believe it's the father who can affirm all sorts of things in their children as they understand their role in their lives to shape their destiny.
I told you this panel was awesome. Awesome panel. Bishop Reed, can you give us a little insight on that? Can you hear us, Bishop?
Since everybody's jumping on the same bandwagon, yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I guess I'm not being heard.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
We're all nodding. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. I think I'm going to jump on the same bandwagon in that this affirmation is a major part of fatherhood. I know of hundreds of men have never been affirmed by their father, and I did not know how much it meant till I was about 35, 36 years old. And my dad was dying of cancer, and I take him to go get his treatment, and I brought him back to my house at that time, and he was in the bed, just relaxing, and I went in to have a conversation with him, and I said to him that, I do want you to know that I do understand that my mother and your relationship, the reason why it did not last or y'all were separated, it was not all on you. I know it wasn't all your fault. I knew he played a part in it, and I even knew to what degree he may have played in it. But I also recognized and realized that it takes two to tango. So in doing so, he kind of broke, and he responded to me and said that in all my years of living, I felt that no one has ever considered my side
Wow.
of the story. And I want to say to you, not only are you a good preacher, not only are you a good pastor, but you are a good man. And I am so proud. My brothers, I just want to let you know that I literally broke because I didn't know that I needed that. And when I heard that, something in me not only welled up and made me feel full up, and something that I didn't know that was a deficiency, something that was lacking, literally at that very moment became full. And I at that moment, I think I let down my guard of trying to prove that I was a man. So many different intervals in my life. And I didn't know that I was crying for that affirmation to affirm me. And then when you study our culture, then in Africa, it's always that time, a period they call rite of passage. And unfortunately, that tradition has not passed down in our present day, situation and our present day reality, that we don't do that anymore. That someone a man, I believe, has to tell another man that they are somewhat or has something to do with affirming their manhood, of them being a man. So yeah, I'm with Bishop Mark over there, where that affirmation, I think, is major and a necessity for us to function to some level of wholeness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A powerful moment in your life. Let's ask Bishop Evans to close us out with that question and give us some thoughts.
I'm in agreement with everything that has been said. One of the things I think is most challenging about being a father in the time that we live is that we are in an attention economy. There are so many different things that are competing for the attention, especially of our children. And it is a word in the Bible, the New Testament, admonish, jumps up in my head when I think about this attention economy, and that this is my interpretation of that word admonish, and that is to a teacher teaching a student to position that student for what the student knows is possible for the student. In other words, we're responsible for creating a mindset in our children that will take them forward and perhaps connect them with what we believe their destiny holds for them, that all things are possible, that they are able to achieve many things. And I think a father's voice is key in letting a child know. And it's kind of like I can't make my grown children do things, but I never want to be accused of my voice not being in their heads at the proper time. It's a father has to deposit words, even then they're not. They don't want to hear them. He's got to deposit words because in a time of need, those words will fight their way through whatever circumstance they're in, rebellion or whatever it is, and they'll remember what you said. So I think one of our great gifts is the ability to deposit and the courage to deposit, even when they don't want to hear it, because they are part of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
So we do know some of their potential.
Yes.
We do know what they should be capable of. I'm always amazed by families where everyone can sing. And I realize that part of that is demand, but part of that is telling them they can, and then watching that thing being demonstrated. And ultimately, every kid in the family ends up singing. Why? Because there's something in them they know is there. They may not be the great lead singer, but there's a recognition of ability and an admonition to position themselves to do it. Start doing the scale, start doing the things necessary to bring out what it is we know that's in you. So I think we have to try to at least, there's a flood of words coming from the culture, and we have to raise up a standard of word so that they have something to fight with, and we can gain their attention, especially in times when wisdom works, and to keep from going on. I just believe we're responsible for the mindsets of our children as much as possible.
Absolutely. I'm telling you, everybody, you better get your notepads, write this stuff down. This is this is free. This is free. So we're going to ask all of our viewers if you would, give us some questions. We're going to answer some live questions at the end, and we also want you to give some comments. I mean, this is just great. This panel is awesome as we take this challenge on taking the risk, meet your father. Our second question. And we're going to ask all of our panelists, just feel free to answer. But that first question, we wanted everyone to kind of start with that. And remember, our theme this evening is the importance of fatherhood. That's our theme this evening. There has always been a debate about the level of significance of a father in their children's life. Can you help us understand how significant you believe that is and why?
Well, I jump first. My mission for all my children, I have all girls. But now I am very involved in my grandchildren's lives. So for the first time, I'm helping to raise a boy. And I've started having these early conversations with him when he was like 2 and 3. What men do, what men don't do, how men behave, how men react. I believe with all my heart that we play a critical role, if you will, molding our children, especially our boys and significantly our girls. I don't think you can underestimate the role of a father in a child's life because of the impact that the lack of a father has. The damage that is done because a father is not present gives us an indication of how important it is for a father to be present, if that makes sense to you all. And so I'm looking at an antithesis type of thing where I'm looking at the issues that a lack of a father causes, and that kind of spurs my involvement. That I see the negativity. I've counseled 48,000 people in 30 years, and half of those have been relationships, and maybe 25% have been parentally related. And the lack of a good father and the lack of a good mother have long range effects that most adults don't overcome because it's a sensitive area and people are not readily open to a voice. But as spiritual fathers, all of us, and natural fathers too, I think we see both sides of the coin. Now, we can talk to the natural side because we understand it, but then we can apply that spiritual side, which I believe brings the deliverance. So I'll never believe that our voices are not responsible for helping to create the adults that we call our children.
Wow, powerful. Anybody else want to jump in there a little bit with that?
I'll add a piece. So God in heaven is our spiritual father, is our heavenly father. And, things on earth are a surprise to us, but nothing is a surprise to God, right? God knows everything. And so as natural fathers, we don't know everything, but we've had enough experiences, right? We've gained some wisdom. We've learned some patience. We've hurt and we've had forgiven. I know myself personally, I'm learning the power of forgiveness and the power of healing. And sometimes when I watch my children, and all of them are distinctly different and uniquely different, and having to have the skills to jump from one to the other, right? It's some things that I know, right? And Bishop Evans, you hit it. They're not gonna do, I can't make my grown children. They think they're grown. I can't make my grown children do what I say. So my oldest is 20, he'll be 21 this year. And my daughter, she's 19, right? So I can't make them do anything, but I know some things. And one of the things I learned early on is if I love them the right way, and I get to tell them the truth in love and plant those seeds, Bishop Evans, that you were talking about, man, it has, I can look back and have a feeling of happiness and rejoice to know that I can still make that connection with my children. I can remember my dad telling me when I thought I was grown, when I was in my 20s, I remember my dad telling me, "You don't want to do this, son." But I was grown enough to do it anyway. Right? I was 23 and I had to have this Mercedes Benz. My dad knew that I didn't consider more than the payment. I thought I could come up with this down payment, make the monthly payments. I didn't think about insurance. I didn't think about the maintenance on a Mercedes Benz. Right. I didn't think about the gas that goes with a Mercedes Benz. I didn't think about the warranty that goes with a Mercedes Benz. And eventually I had to get rid of that Mercedes Benz. I had to get rid of that Mercedes Benz. My dad knew, and he let me do it because I was grown. And it's the same thing with my children, you know, having that faith, right? And it's tough sometimes. I know my oldest son is my most daring child. He's gonna, if the stove is hot and I tell him it's hot, he's gonna touch it. He's gonna touch it. And I have to have the faith that he's gonna touch it. It's not gonna burn him completely up. And then be there for him to help him learn from his mistakes. And so that connection and that seed that we plant early, and Bishop, you hit it the nail on the head. It makes you think about, what if I wasn't there as a father?
Yeah.
And I grew up in the inner city, and my son is not from the inner city. He's now a county kid, but he's run into the inner city, living close to Baltimore. And I'm able to give him some experience so that he doesn't make as many mistakes and then doesn't make the same mistakes that I make. Because one of the things that I tell my children in this day and age, mistakes are more costly.
Yes, sir.
The mistakes are more costly, especially for a young African-American male. They're more costly. And so just, it makes me happy. You don't always like to go through all those things, but I was there. And that's important. That's super important. Yes.
Yeah.
That was good. Anybody want to add to that? Because I want to add a little tail end to that question.
Okay.
Anybody want to add anything else before we add that tail end? My tail end to that question is, what do we say to that hurt mother or that hurt girlfriend who is struggling about the significance of the role of a father in her son's life? You know, what can we speak to that person that's right here, right now, that is watching this and that's struggling with that because of their own hurt or their own issues? What can we say to them, since we're on a topic about the significance of the role of a father in their child's life? Anybody?
Well, before the guys jump in, I know they're coming. There's Keith. I knew he was coming. He's just a little slow off the line. Come on, Keith.
Come on, Bishop Reed. Come on, Bishop Reed.
Yeah, man, I'm trying. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on with my connection here, but
That's all right. We got you.
I think one of the things you say, how do you speak to, what would you say to a mother that is hurt?
Yep.
He'll be back. Go ahead, Mark.
Again, I'm going to go back to the affirmation piece. We live in a culture that is so starved for affirmation and yet so driven to identify themselves as who they think they are. And so we've got this complex way of looking at identity because we have become so individualized and we have forgotten I can't know myself by myself. When God says to Adam, it's not good for you to be alone, he's also saying it to the woman, it's not good for you to be alone. I can't know myself by myself. It takes two to know one. And for a woman that would wrestle with her significance, to me, that would indicate that there's perhaps all sorts of issues in her own life that stem back to her formative years, in her relationship with her primary caregivers, her parents, or one of them, that probably needs to be addressed and healed. We can't go back and change the past. But what we end up doing, I often tell people this from a psychological perspective, what we don't deal with in adolescence shows up in midolescence. In other words, whatever doesn't get sorted out by the time we're 12, we face between 30 and 65 years old. That's your middle years. And what we've got is an entire generation that's going through crises from 30 to 65 because we brought all our wounds with us into adulthood and we don't know how to sort them out. And then we don't trust people. So because I was burned early on, I'm not going to disclose anything to you because I've got to put up my walls of defense. In the meantime, I'm starved for significance and I don't realize I need the gift of someone else saying, I see you for you, but I never let them in because the walls I have built don't just keep the bad out, they keep the good out as well. And so I think we've got an entire generation of people that don't know who they are. They can hear who they are in Christ till they're blue in the face, but it's almost as if they've got to, the way they've got to sort out the past is you can't go back and fix something that is beyond repair, especially if your parents are gone. What you have to do is grieve the loss and discover as an adult, how do I move forward in the Lord, knowing that if I can let the past be buried, if I can give it a decent burial and say, what have I learned in life from my pain that can now serve me? I don't want to spend my life mistrusting people, but I do want to spend my life building significant relationships, which means I've got to risk because I can't walk by faith without risk. I can't walk in trust without risk. I can't walk in hope without risk. I've got to risk the possibility of whatever that might be that's tied to those ghosts that are haunting me, but I've got to put those ghosts to bed. I've got to learn how to put them to bed. I don't know if I'm making all that much sense in what I'm saying.
That made a lot of sense. Yes.
If I can jump in there while Bishop Reed is getting his straightened out. A couple of things. I have some friends who live in Alaska, and they're used to a part of the year being without sun. And they get used to that environment until they don't think they need sun every month of the year. I make that illustration because there are some people who did not have parents, did not have a strong father, maybe didn't have a strong mother. And they've gotten used to that condition so much so that they don't see the need for it.
Wow.
But in actuality, picking up what Bishop Sharona said, when Mark says these issues come out later, it's true. It reminds me of the story where the woman with the issue of blood and the girl that dies at 12 years old are in the same text. And you've got this grown woman with a grown problem. And I blend the text together, but she died internally at 12. And now she's this grown woman with a known issue. And Jesus has to come along and deliver the little girl. before the woman can become whole. You know, so
Mm.
it's an amazing dynamic. And I think of, when we talk about our adult children, I think of what Bishop Tony Miller taught me. An amazing revelation. He says, when our children are kids, we parent them by command.
Mm.
Go to bed, brush your teeth, come eat your dinner, eat your vegetables. When they hit puberty in their teen years, you parent them by conversation.
Mm.
He said, however, when they're grown and they're on their own, you parent them by concern.
Mm-hmm.
So you go from command to conversation to concern. And he was quick to say, when you get to the concern piece, season in their life, you have to wait for them to ask you for help. And then you're able to give them a combination of conversation and command to get them out of the trouble they've gotten themselves in.
Mm.
But it's amazing how if parents can learn those three phases, because normally we stay locked in the command phase for the entirety of a child's life if we're not careful. Because especially in minority communities, we tend to tell our children what to think rather than teaching them how to think.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a revelation of that when I was young, because I had a cousin that got beat for the same thing every day. Until one day I went in the room and sat down on the bed next to him and said, man, let me try to talk to you, because you're not going to make it to 16. You know, they're going to destroy you. and they were disciplining him, but never telling him how to think, never teaching him how to think. So he was making the same mistakes over and over again. And I think as parents, we do have an obligation to teach them how to think, even though that is a much longer process.
Bishop, I remember when I shifted in my discipline patterns from exactly what you just said, where it was just discipline, to understanding that wasn't really teaching them the right thing, because they get conditioned to discipline.
Absolutely.
So I had to make an adjustment, and I had to realize as the parent, it wasn't on them, it was on me. It was on me to make the adjustment in how I reach my children, how I connect with my children. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just from, say, an old-fashioned whooping or a scolding. My children, to tell you now, I would, you know, at some point I'd scold them, and next minute, you know, I'm telling them I love them and sending them on their way to school. They tell me, I don't want to hear you talk about you love me. You just gave me that lashing, and you talking about you love me. But they understand both from me. They understand discipline, but they also understand the other side of discipline, the love side of the discipline. So if you're going to discipline them, you got to love them just as much as you discipline them.
Mm-hmm. Bishop Reed might not remember this, but one of the things that stands out in my mind, there's several things, but I remember one time him telling me how his children would apologize to him after he chastised them. I thought that was amazing. I'm sorry, Dad, I messed up. Mm-hmm. I said, what kind of formula is this guy using? What? But it was absolutely outstanding to me that he was raising them as such to understand their infraction, and the biggest infraction was letting him down. Mm-hmm. I thought that was phenomenal. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He didn't think I was paying attention back
then. Bishop Reed, you want to bring some context?
Man, my thing keep going in and out. I don't know if it's my router. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to grab hold to this opportunity right now that I am here and I'm not going out. I kind of picked up bits and pieces of what was being said. One was the issue of dealing with a young girl's hurt or a mother's hurt of a father not being there. I think in every one of our situations, there is there's a side of all of us that where we came from, we bring to where we are. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we don't even recognize that this is what I've seen in my experience. We don't even recognize that our past has anything to do with our present. A lot of people just don't connect the dots that, well, maybe the reason why you are perpetually doing this is because maybe this is all you have come to know about this aspect of your life. Or
Yeah.
why is it that every woman in this family has children out of wedlock? And then you go back to where they came from, and I'll say 99.9% of the time, benefit of the doubt, 98.9% of the time, that that's where they come from. That's the context in which they have experienced growing up. I know, and that's not all bad things, because we not only take the bad, but we also are quick to deny that which may not have been as productive in our lives as it should be. We don't want to take the bad. We want to disown that. Like, that really has nothing to do with what I'm doing now. But when you look at life and you look back at where you came from, that's what you brought to the situation and the table. And we go through the logical breaking the curses of, as in the past. But you can't break them if you don't acknowledge what did take place in that. If you don't acknowledge that my past has a lot to do with my present, and the way I function has to do with the way I was formed, formalized. I think, theologically speaking, that a tree does not grow until this passage, I think, is in Psalms 127, 128, that talks about the children shall be olive plants around your table. A olive plant grows up to be a big tree, and from the olive they get oil, they get healing. So your children have to be cultivated, formed, bend the twig while it's a twig, and where you won't have to break the bark. So I think all of that has to do with the way that we were brought up, the situations, the circumstances that we have encountered in our lives. And if we don't go back and deal with it from a bibliocentric perspective, it will mess with our present day reality. A proper bibliology forms
We're losing you,
proper
Keith.
theology, which forms the proper psychology, would help. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know.
Yeah, we're losing you.
Okay.
But we're here. What you're saying, Bishop. It is, the reason that I decided to do Taking the Risk, Meet Your Father is because of that. I felt like a traitor all of my life because my father was absent, and I felt like I was turning on my family if I brought that up. Almost like, why do you care? It was almost, nobody said it, but it was almost a feeling like, well, why are you worried about it? You have us,
Yeah, go again.
And it was almost taboo to talk about the fact, it was almost like I just came down on earth, and the father wasn't, he wasn't there. And so when we look at that particular piece, I hear those common themes coming out, those responses around, if you don't deal with it then, you're going to deal with it now. And so as a 43-year-old man, I'm dealing with the effects of suppressing that right now in my life. And so we thank you for those comments. Really fast, if we could just ask one of our panelists, there's been some recent thoughts, and people say it's not really any of our business, but when we talk about discipline, there is a very popular gospel star who was recorded, with disciplining his son verbally over the phone. And when we talk about, I'm trying to, stay on the straight and narrow.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to talk about, because as fathers, what is that line in regards to disciplining our children? Or is that the correct terminology to use at all? And so I know I've always been taught as a man that it is my role to keep, my children in line. And when we look at educators and others who are quote unquote in these positions to keep children in line. So I'm asking, what do you think about that? Even if we just get one person to share out.
Well, I don't know. I can't recall, and I don't really believe in absolutes.
Mm-hmm.
I have a 49-year-old daughter. I have a 27-year-old daughter. I have never cursed at them. No matter how angry I've been, I've never cursed at them. Because I firmly believe that what you say goes on deposit with your children. And I think it can impact their respect for you. Because I think we are absolutely, as fathers, our sons and our daughters have a right to expect greater from us. So I've been mad enough to cut their heads off, but I've never expressed it in a way that, Kirk, and I've known Kirk since he was about maybe 16. So I disagree that that's being real. I agree. I think you can be real and not be crass and foul, especially with your children. And you have to maintain a place of honor with them. That's what I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Anybody else before we go to our next question, or we're going to leave it with Bishop Evans?
I just want to say this. I grew up in West Brighton on Staten Island. My best friend was Joseph Campbell, and his mom. I'm Italian. He's African American, and his mom used to tell us how to behave. And if I got in trouble at his house, I got a whooping there, and then I got a whooping when I got home. Because my mother gave her permission. But Mrs. Campbell used to say, "Don't put your business out in the street." And I think the social media craze, I think we have gotten to a place where there's far too much of our business out in the street.
Mm-hmm.
There are no
Mm-hmm.
boundaries anymore. And I was grieved by the whole thing. The whole thing grieved me on many levels, because I feel like there's no sense of propriety. There's no sense of boundaries. Now it's a free for all, and we can do whatever we want. And forget about civility. Let's talk about, as followers of Jesus, what are the boundaries within which we maintain the kind of propriety that is reflective of what it means to walk with Christ? And I just think we're putting our business out on the street in a way that's very unbecoming of followers of Jesus. That's just me.
Mm-hmm. All right. Wanted to tag that with that discipline question. We're up to our last question. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bishop Reed.
I just wanted to say that along with everybody else, but the other side is that I am not for, as you said, people using expletives and correcting their children. I can't say that my mother has never used the foul word in her frustration in raising me or raising us. It wasn't so much as being derogatory in that she was calling me something. She may have used the word, "I'm gonna beat your behind." Y'all know how to say that. She says that. But it wasn't like, "You are a so and so and so and so." Nothing like that. Nothing like that. First of all, second of all, I do this, that as a Christian, as a believer, sometimes we act or we forget like we don't have two natures. That there are times that our sinful nature does get the best of us. And I just think that as Christians, viewing other Christians' dilemmas, problems, situation, we ought not act like that's not a possibility for any of us to do that kind of thing. I do think that as Bishop Mark was saying, I think that son bears a lot of that responsibility, because you just don't do that kind of thing to your father. And it's also I think what was left out of the conversation is that both of them have been going to counseling for years about their relationship and about how things have been done and what has been done throughout their relationship. So he left all of that out of the conversation for what I'm told about people that know the inside story of the situation. So I think the son really had no right putting that on social media. I know Kurt didn't do it. I mean, the person didn't do it. I know he didn't do it at all. But that son, I think that was a little bit dishonoring and disrespectful in him putting it out there. The social media thing has caused us, even as Christians, to get approval from other people when our approval should come from God.
That's a nice segue. Thank you, Bishop, for that. Our last question for this evening before we open it up for some questions from our viewers is, and this is a question that, you know, I talk to so many people about, and it goes back to handling stuff back then, or you will have to handle it later. And the last question that we have is, do we have a responsibility as fathers and as men to be emotionally available for our children? How so?
I'll jump in.
Okay.
I'll jump in. So my answer is my answer is yes. I come from an era where, yes, you know, boys had to be tough. Boys didn't cry. I grew up in a neighborhood where you surely couldn't cry. You surely couldn't be tough. And what I later learned on in life is that wasn't natural. It wasn't natural. I was born with certain emotions. I was born with certain feelings that I had to suppress. And I'm glad I learned it early enough that I didn't put that on my children, especially my boys, right? And it's very important that we are there emotionally for our children. I had to teach my son that it's okay to say, I love you. It's okay to say a hug, or when you're hurting, it's okay to cry. Right? I had a conversation just this week with my daughter, who's so much like me, right? So she's about to go to school, and she has a car. Well, she had a car, hit a pothole in the city of Baltimore, and destroyed her car. The insurance company totaled the car. So she's in school virtually because she didn't get to go to school because of COVID. So she's frustrated. She's in a local community college. She doesn't have a car. She's wondering if she really didn't get the opportunity to go to school this year. So she's stressed out. And I kept saying, what's wrong? Are you okay? I'm okay, Daddy. I said, boy, she sounds just like me. I said, just like me. Like, look, when all is well, I'm like this. When the world is falling apart, I'm like this. You know, it's just, we're taught to be cool, calm, and collective. And eventually, in the conversation, we hit that nerve about the car and school, and she just broke down crying. Right? And I was glad that we had that moment, man. It taught me so much. We had that moment, and I was able to say to her, it's okay. I'm so glad that you were able to let it out. But it made me think about, because in my current life, you know, working and leading, I'm still kind of the same way. Everything's okay. I'm handling everything. I'm over here, I'm over there, and I got to act like everything okay. And we live in a world where currently mental health is one of the sexiest topics out there, right? But my question is it, because if you look on social media, there's a statement that everybody's using. It's okay not to be okay. And my question is it really okay not to be okay? Can your boss handle it if you're not okay? Can your wife handle it if you're not okay? Can your children handle it if you're not okay? Can social media handle it if you're not okay? The answer is no. So there's this false sense of security out there, right? It's okay not to be okay, but it's really not. But when you have a connection with your children, you do have to let them know. At this stage, Daddy does have you. And it's okay not to be okay because I have you. But there's a responsibility on us to realize, I know God has us in heaven, but there's a responsibility on us to make sure somebody has us, right? Because you can't be Superman 24/7. You got to take that cape off. You got to take that cape off. And a lot of us make the mistake of keeping the cape on too long.
I think the difficulty is revealing to those that are assigned to love you and who you're assigned to love, your humanity and your godliness in a balanced way. I think a lot of times we are guilty of showing them all our victories.
That's right.
And they will learn some things from our defeats. So there's this very precarious balance that has to be established where they see you as Superman, but they know Clark Kent.
That's another book.
Yeah. That reminds me of the story of Elijah. Elijah has this profound moment of victory on Mount Carmel, has then a confrontation just with Jezebel's messenger, not with her, and it totally sends him into what today we would call psychologically clinical depression. And he from northern Israel all the way down to the southern kingdom, and he's got his servant with him, this young man. It's not Elisha yet. This is another young man who he could groom for the future. And he leaves him there to run by himself under a broom tree and doesn't take him with him to show him how he processes his pain. He's obviously seen him with his victory, but Elijah will not allow him to see his pain. And as a result of that, even though God gives Elijah and Elijah never finishes his destiny. The chariot waits to take him home because instead of anointing 2 kings and a prophet, he only anoints the prophet and says, you do the rest, because there was something incomplete in him. And I would argue it's because he wasn't willing to show his own open transparency and brokenness and humanness. How do I get through depression? How do I get through anxiety? I mean, if I'm a human, I'm a man of like passions. Let me show those that are following my lead. Life isn't always a bowl of cherries. How do I process my pain and still lead in spite of it?
Instead, Bishop Mark, we would have our children think we have no pain.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. That's so powerful that it is so important, because when I talk to so many young men, that's their challenge, that they never felt that their father or male figures were available, or anyone for that mindset was available to them in an emotional way. And so you start a different track record throughout your life, and that passes on to how you raise your children. And so that's just a powerful piece. I mean, this was just absolutely awesome. We want everybody still to go to church on Sunday virtually, because I know you think that you had all this word tonight, but we want you still to make sure that you show up virtually on Sunday. We want to thank Bishop Evans just for his hospitality and his wisdom. We want to thank Mr. Dickerson just for, giving us that tuning in to understanding, so many different facets of fatherhood. And we want to wish your daughter well this year at Clark University. We want to thank Bishop Reed for continuing to be that visionary and giving us. And we love that story that you gave about those last couple moments with your father. And to Bishop Sharona, I was trying to write, but I didn't want to mess up my notes. But just a phenomenal alignment with the Word of God, so that we can go back and revisit. We're going to open it up at this time. We want to thank all of our panelists, but we want to take some of your questions this evening. We're going to take a couple of your questions and allow our panelists to answer them. And then before we conclude, and remember to look out for Taking the Risk, Meet Your Father. There's going to be the fatherless child coming to you in the month of April. So we're excited about that also. So we're going to begin to take some questions. All right. Our first question comes from Kelly Bourne. We live in a society that tears men down, especially Black and brown men. So if there's an agreement on the importance of affirming a child as a father, how do we as a village help to empower the fathers in our communities and families despite how the world tries to tear them down? That's an awesome question. Anybody want to take that? Any of our panelists? Mr. Dickerson, seems like you're about to jump out.
I will. No, that's an amazing question, and she threw that word in there, village, and we used to always say it takes a village to raise a family. I think about my dad, and most of my friends' father was absent. But when my dad did something for me, he did something for all of my friends, right? And I'm kind of the same way, and I'm exactly the same way. When I go on vacation, one of my children's friends or two of my children's friends are with me. They're always at my house. I'm taking them out to dinner. I think we have an obligation beyond our children. I think we have an obligation, and we're all Christians, and we're all men of spirit. I think we have an obligation beyond our children and into our communities, right? And somebody said it earlier. I think it was Bishop Mark. Your best friend's mom had permission to reprimand you. I had the same thing. And so when we see, and we had the question about mothers without fathers around, I think we have to do the same thing, right? We have an obligation when we see a need to try and meet it if we have the skill set, the ability, and the emotional awareness. But I love the term that Bishop Evans used, the people that we are assigned to love. It's not just our own children.
That's right.
It's not just our own children.
If I could weigh in as the
Absolutely
as the odd guy out, since my complexion is not dark.
You're not odd.
Well, I don't.
I mean, you are odd, but you're not the odd guy out.
There are things I cannot speak to, but what I can speak to is my personal journey. I was raised an only child. I didn't want to be a father of only children. We lost our first child within the first 2 trimesters of birth, and we adopted 2 boys. Matthew is my oldest. Those of you that know Matthew, Matthew is Black, and we adopted Matthew knowing he was going to be placed in our home at 3 months old. And I was very aware that Matthew needed to know that Black is beautiful. Matthew needed to know that Jesus didn't look like me. We prepared his bedroom with, now there's an African-American artist whose last name is Blackshear, brilliant sculptor, brilliant painter. We filled that room and the house with sculptures by African-American artists and a lot of dark complected figures. And we found a picture of a Jamaican Jesus with dreadlocks and sitting by water fishing, and that was right at the head of his bed. But I realized even that wasn't enough. But at the time, we were pastoring a church in Raleigh. We were endeavoring to build a cross-cultural church, and if it were not for the African-American people, because I didn't have brothers and sisters, if it were not for the African-American community that treated us like a family and treated my son like he was their niece, their nephew, their cousin, their little brother, Matthew would have never had the privilege of being raised fully. I'm so proud of Matthew in so many ways, but I mean, I could not have done that alone. It took that entire church in Raleigh to raise my son, Matthew.
Powerful. We're going to take one more question for our panelists. And we have Cleveland here. He says, as a single parent, how important is it to forgive and model forgiveness of the absent parent? We talked, that's a great question. I'm gonna say that again. As a single parent, how important is it to forgive and model forgiveness of the absent parent?
I think you have to find a balance. You do have to forgive. You have to express that forgiveness. and there's a deal of patience. There's a degree of patience that's needed. Some things you will not be able to raise in a critical manner with the child as the child is growing. But I do find that as the child grows and becomes more adult, they start to, their perspective on the parent changes, and they start to see them in a more realistic way. So you have, for some things you have to wait for experience to teach the child. On other things that are critical to the child's development, you have to model forgiveness, but you also have to model honesty, and that's a very fine balance. I spent a year and a half, I think, a year and 2 months, counseling about 12 teenagers on Fridays in my office. And what I learned was that a lot of parents are not making mistakes because they're bad people. They're busy. And when they come home, the full-time job, they're too tired for. And I call the full-time job raising your kids. So what happens, you find yourself having to play this balancing game all the time. What to show them, what to hold back. What's that management theory? Seeing everything, correcting a little, overlooking a lot. I think that works. Seeing everything, correct a little, overlook a lot. But the key is seeing everything, so you know what to correct and know what to overlook.
Awesome. Cleveland, we hope that helped you out with your question. And we have time for one more question. Let's not forget, in April, the Fatherless Son. I want you to go to www.dralphonsoevans.com to figure out what day that's coming in April. We want to take one last question before we go. This has been an awesome, phenomenal panel, and we want to thank them so much for their contributions this evening. We have one more question before we go. All right. This is from Mr. Poindexter, David Poindexter. How can we get more of our clergy, especially younger clergy, to be more proactive about encouraging and promoting more programs for men to take our young men under their wings and train, educate them? Need this message to come more from the pulpits. Anybody want to take a?
Well, I think for this group, that's not an issue. Dr. Reed's always had strong men's ministry.
Well, Bishop, can I add something? And it's kind of opposite of the question. So if you notice, I'm on the panel with all these esteemed gentlemen, like Bishop Evans, Bishop Mark, Dr. Evans. When you look at my names, it just says Odell.
That's enough.
It just says Odell because I teach this all over the country. I believe you do not need that title of pastor or preacher to serve. I am privileged to serve at a high level. No ministry degrees whatsoever, no reverend, no bishop, no apostle, and I respect titles. I believe they are well deserved, especially on this title. But sometimes we get too caught up into titles and we let the lack of titles hold us back. I like to think that I'm an example of being able to serve without the preacher, without the pastor. There's nothing you can't do without that title. There's nothing you can't do without that title to serve in a high fashion and to mentor young men and to present programs. So I just think that I don't want anybody to get caught up to think that it only has to come from the pulpit. Yes, it should, but all of us have power.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I am Dr. Alphonso Evans Sr., and I have been your host this evening. Oh, I'm sorry, Bishop Reed. You had something, Bishop Reed?
No, I was just getting ready to say what my brother was saying was that, yeah, I was getting ready to say what my brother was saying was that the issue that it's not so much that the church or we are not doing ministry when it comes to men. I think it gets a little twisted because I think a lot of the pew expects for the pulpit to do all the ministry when we are supposed to be equipping the saints so that the saints can do the work of the ministry. So I think the men in the pew have a responsibility to deal with those young men and those that are, as you say, without the title, Brother Odell. And I think without the title, y'all can go in places that we would not be accepted in.
I agree.
And y'all can do some
Absolutely.
things that we would not be, it would not be received from us to do it because of our title. And that's why I believe if we do it the biblical way, we do the equipping and let the saints do the work.
Yeah.
Outstanding, outstanding. Again, an awesome evening. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us this evening. Again, I'm Dr. Alphonso Evans Sr. This has been Taking the Risk, Meet Your Father, panel number 1, the importance of fatherhood. We want you to have a great evening, be safe, and we will see you in April as we continue this conversation on our journey to read the book, Taking the Risk, Meet Your Father. Have a great evening. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it, and I'm grateful. So grateful
God
to you
bless you,
today.
man.
Thank you very
God bless
much.
you.
Thank you.